Basically it. So thank you very much for being here. I think where we'd like to start is on some financial questions. The district is obviously dealing right now with some budget challenges. And as a non-incumbent who's running, I wondered if you could just spend a minute and critique the way the board has handled this issue of the mistake in the projections on the property tax increase and also the 3-year union contract.
Sure. There's a lot there, so I'll start to tell you things I'm thinking about, and let me know if I skip over something or you want clarification on something. I think that, I think it's clear right now we are in a structural deficit, and that is a concern, and we have to take action on that. If you look at the beginning when this first happened, one of the first things that I think is important that we do is sort of a post-mortem as to what happened and why it happened and how it happened. Are there structural issues are there structural problems that we need to make more robust to try to prevent this from happening in the future? And I think that the district has been doing that and is continuing to do that. So hopefully I will have an opportunity to learn more about exactly where they've landed and what they put in place. But that's a big concern, going forward. But then we're right here with a structural deficit, right? And I think that some of the actions the actions that they took last night on the budget work toward cutting into that deficit and eliminating that deficit, but I think that they weren't aggressive enough. I do appreciate that the district is currently working with some consultants to look at ways to make the district leaner and more efficient. And that's important. And my understanding is from last night's meeting that they found over $500,000 at the central office that they can probably cut. And that makes sense to me to do whether you're in a deficit or not. I think that's a thing that we could benefit from either way. So I do appreciate those, and yet many of the cuts that they were suggesting from last night are from different buckets of pots of money and funds and reserves and whatnot. And I'm not really supportive of that in as much. I'd like us to dig deeper because although the bond funds are set aside for a tech refresh, for technology, and that's great, and that's what we asked the voters for, and they said yes. And so I'm not opposed necessarily to spending bond money in general on some technology, but to make it part of our tech refresh, which is an operational expense, is not fiscally wise, I don't think. So, okay, for right now, we've got that money there and we can use it, but as we move ahead, we need to find a way to get something like our tech refresh into our operational budget, not a bond fund. So I think there are some actions that the district is taking that are important and that will make us stronger, but I also think we need to keep digging and do more than we're doing.
So if you had been on the board last night, the board split basically 4-1 on a whole series of attempts by Ken Dauber to accelerate the efforts to cut the budget so that we're not dealing with an even bigger problem for next year.
Right.
How would you have voted on those 4 motions?
On the 4 amendments that Mr. Dauber
There are 5, I guess. Yeah.
Might need a little help on all 5 of those. But what I saw was, I think part of why I was frustrated was because I don't think it's the board's job necessarily to come up with what these budget cuts should be, and yet I saw Mr. Dauber coming from a place of frustration that, okay, you guys aren't doing this, so let me make some suggestions. The Me Too raises, I am not in support of, and yet we're already months into principals having this as part of their monthly budget. So I would really hesitate to do a blanket rescission of raises, is that a word? I don't think I wouldn't have supported that. What else did he talk about? The 3 elementary school teachers.
And just let me interrupt you there. So the reason for that is that we're 2 months into it, or that 5 plus 5% increases for them in the span of a few months is something that they've budgeted for?
5% and 4%, right?
Because organizations all the time will take steps to correct a budget problem, such as mandatory furloughs, such as reducing executive pay,
Yeah.
across the board pay freezes, pay cuts. I mean, these are tools that are used in organizations.
Yeah. I remember when this first happened and Mr. Dauber brought it up. I guess it was Mr. Dauber that brought it up, and Ms. Godfrey seconded going and finding out what's out there, how do we compare. And I was a big fan of doing that. I think it was right when the raises were started, and right there I was thinking, like, if we're going to do this, let's do this now before we fold it into the raise. And it didn't happen then. And I remember being a fan of what Mr. Dauber and Ms. Godfrey said right there, trying to gather more information and make a more informed decision. But the rest of the board did not support them on that, and so they went ahead with the raises. And now I do hesitate to take them back now. I see your point, and I think we have to be really conservative going forward. But I think I don't know. I wouldn't take it back.
So I just want to make sure I understand. You would have supported there being more cuts that would be lasting cuts.
Yes.
Implemented in this budget year. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I am saying
rather
that.
than one-time movements and taking
right,
from
here's some
reserves
extra money and we didn't know
right,
this, and
right.
here's from reserves, and we're pulling this from the staff development fund, and I understand in the short term using some of those fills as you look bigger picture. I think in some degree it's a both and. I don't think we necessarily had to find $4 million structural dollars this month to cut. So I do think that as we are looking bigger picture into next year and talking about that on October 18th, that is worth doing and that is important. And so I'm comfortable with a little bit of leeway there in, okay, as we're making those bigger decisions, here are some backfills we can do. But I think that we need to cut seriously where we can cut. It's a structural deficit, and we need to put
And so what would be at
ourselves
the top of your list for that process?
Well, so some of them have been identified by the district. And as I stated before, I think it's close to $600,000 to cut from the central office. Sounds really good to me. I know that everyone agrees it should be far from the classroom. What that means clearly varies person by person, board member by board member. I did hear a suggestion last time, we should just cut professional development. To me, as an educator, that's one of the closest things to the classroom that you could possibly do. So I think we have to be really careful in that. There has been talk, I know that Ms. Bain-Caswell said, have we looked at our facilities costs, maintaining our facilities, and looking at how often we're watering things and what, that kind of, are we painting things? Those are the kinds of things that I think are farthest from the classroom. Sure, everyone loves a fresh coat of paint, but that's not high on my priority list for what we're going to be doing. And then I also think looking at, while we all agree that more support in the classroom is very important, the quality of that support matters a lot. So I think asking the staff to look at what kinds of things are the principals and the site-based people finding are making a difference in the classroom. So maybe we have more aides and maybe that's great, but did that jump from 5 hours a week to 10 hours a week in aide time really make a difference? Or is that not where we get the biggest bang for our buck?
Would you eliminate the communications position, which is the last major position that was filled?
I would certainly entertain that. If that was brought to our attention, I would be happy to look at that. Yes. Yeah.
So it sounds like you don't view these as board decisions?
They are certainly board decisions to decide whether or not we think they should be cut. I do think it is in our best interest to have the district bring those suggestions to us based on what they see operationally as having an effect. So yeah, I think that is something I would definitely entertain. My hesitation comes because in the 2 months that I've been out talking to members of the community, people are frustrated that they feel communication is lacking. So knowing that that I think part of the reason that person was hired was to improve communication, and yet I don't know if that's the best way to improve communication. I think there are ways we can look at the communications systems we have in place and think about, are we being most efficient?
So just wrap up on this financial aspect and to get to the union contract. Did you support the adoption of the union contract in May and the 3-year amounts of that contract increase?
I wasn't yet a candidate, and I don't even know if I was thinking of running yet, so I don't know if how would I have voted at the time.
Right.
In hindsight, being 2020, no, it was not a fiscally sound contract to adopt. What I do like is the idea of moving beyond doing it on a yearly basis and doing it at the end of the year for a number of reasons. I think that if we do even a 2-year contract, or at least do it moving ahead, I think it frees us up. If we do more than a 1-year contract, it frees us up to talk about something other than money. And I think it benefits all of our students if the teachers union and the school district are talking about things besides just pay and compensation.
Well, that all happens behind closed doors, so the public isn't talking about it at all.
Yes, the public isn't talking about it at all, but when in negotiations they're talking about what the compensation is, now that we're in a contract, and granted 1 year is over and we're into the 2nd year and the 3rd year we're renegotiating, so this isn't a great example, but if you're able to pass a 2-year contract, then once you have passed it, now there is a period of time where you are not negotiating for your next contract, and you can actually talk about issues that both parties think are important to talk about besides money.
But if you're going to do that, why not take the approach that it's going to be directly tied in some formula fashion to the increase in revenues to the district at the time? I mean, it seems to me the reason the pattern has developed with most school districts negotiating 1-year contracts in California and doing it at the end of their year
is because it's so tied.
Then they know what money they have to spend. And this contract attempted to build in somewhat of a little cushion, not a serious enough cushion to help, but it's certainly feasible if you are going to go to a multi-year contract to have full protection from this type of decrease in revenue.
Right. So as you all know, they put triggers in place in case revenue didn't come in as expected in both directions. And I like the idea of triggers, and clearly the triggers were not nearly robust enough. So I like the idea of having triggers, more robust triggers, and now that this has happened, maybe it's coming from a more informed place where we can talk about what those triggers might be in a way that, well, okay, if the change is this much, I mean, clearly they have to be tied to each other, right? Ideally, we would love it if we could pay every teacher we are happy with enough money to comfortably live within the community so that they can be a part of out-of-school activities. That's not possible. There aren't enough dollars to do that, and we have a budget we have to work within. So given that that's true, now we just have to look at what realistically we can pay based on the revenue. So there are a few reasons why I still like moving ahead with it somewhat, not the least of which is that we have other staff that don't benefit from the retroactive pay, right? So the teachers get this one-time check to make up for that increase, but the classified staff that gets paid by the hour doesn't benefit from that. They do if we do it ahead of time.
Well, no, they got they got exactly what the teachers got.
The hourly staff didn't.
The hourly staff does not get that.
That if they're in the union, they do. That's what the CSEA is. It's representing all of the non-certificated employees.
It's representing all the non-certificated employees. Some that are on salary do,
Yeah.
but many all the ones who are on hourly pay, which are many of them, a significant number of them, don't get retroactive pay. Going ahead, they get the bump, but they don't get it retroactively. So they would benefit in a way that the teachers union doesn't benefit when you do it retroactively.
So how do you come out on, you obviously are a strong advocate for teachers and for paying them as well as we can. The money that is directed to that purpose, however, could be directed to things like reducing class size, to implementing innovation in the schools. There are a lot of other potential priorities for funds besides simply paying teachers more.
Correct.
How do you balance those two in your mind? And you've spent time talking about your desire for more innovative education that costs money that isn't going to be available if the priority is to pay teachers as much as we can.
Yep. And I think it's a multi-pronged issue there, right? One is there are some innovations that don't cost a lot of money, and some of them are some of the ones I am interested in. But I agree with you that some big picture things can certainly have a big ticket attached to them. So yes, we have competing interests, sort of, and I know that was a big conversation on the board last year that Mr. Dauber kept pointing out, oh, well, if we raise one, then it's, and some people said, but don't pit them against each other, and it's the reality of a budget, right? It's, even if you're not intending to pit them against each other, the fact is different priorities are in competition with one another. I do think, I lost my train of thought there. You asked, the innovation of the team. So when it comes to attracting and retaining high quality teachers, I think that it has to be, we have to look big picture at everything we have to offer teachers. So because we cannot offer them unlimited budgets, not that unlimited salaries, and not that I would advocate for that anyway, but clearly that's a struggle. So we have to look at what other things make it nice to work in the district, not the least of which is high quality professional development. And I think that serves sort of all parties, in that people that are concerned that, oh, well, some teachers aren't that great, or I'm not so pleased with this teacher or that teacher, high quality professional development actually mitigates that, that situation. So I think things like professional development, things like when we ask our teachers' opinion about something, weighing their opinion seriously. Asking the teachers about, okay, so if we are losing teachers to other districts or to other areas, what would make this a more appealing place? And I mean, just thinking outside the box, they could come with lots of suggestions on things besides compensation that would make it a more attractive place to stay. And I think we really have to take that seriously, because we can't keep up dollars-wise.
So I want to go back a little bit to the union negotiations.
Yep.
There's some concern that when the contract terms come out, it's already ratified by the union, the board's looking at it. There's been no opportunity for the public to weigh in. Theoretically, the negotiations are open unless they're closed by either party, but practically speaking, they're pretty closed. So I want to ask what your opinion is. Should contract negotiations be always open to the public? How do you see that process unfolding so that people are more involved in what's actually being discussed?
I do think the option of them being closed is important, because I think that is a place where both parties can think outside the box, throw suggestions out there, play devil's advocate, really speak to the nitty-gritty. And I think that increases the odds of us getting to a good contract.
In what areas is that important?
When talking about, in talking about expectations of teachers, and talking about ways that we can increase salary, whether it's benefits or dollars or the step system. I do see a benefit to getting more at a better outcome. And yet I see a big societal concern that, wait a second, this is already ratified, no one had a chance to weigh in. When it comes to most jobs, the public doesn't always have a chance to weigh in. When the public doesn't weigh in on the work that I do, and the work probably that you guys do.
Although we're not public agencies.
But you're not public, exactly. So I do see a benefit to getting more input from the community, and yet I don't know if making the negotiations public adds a lot. I could see supporting putting out there to the community, hey, we're going in to talk about stuff. What is most important to you out there in the community? What are things that you want us to bring up? What are concerns you have? What do you want to see us talk about? But I do think it's important to have some closed door session conversations.
I think some of the concerns are that it's not that the negotiations aren't taking into consideration what the public is thinking, is that the public has no idea what possible ideas have come up, and then there's no opportunity to weigh in, on those. That there's been no public hearing. It's just kind of science.
Well, you also get into a situation as occurred this year where the union president came before the board, or one of the union reps came before the board and said, we're not liking what's happening in negotiations, and paraded a bunch of teachers in front of the board trying to put pressure on them to complete the contract. So it's highly open to manipulation when there's no public exposure to the actual negotiations.
If one of the parties is going to bring to public board, they have concerns, then I think it's fair game to open them up. I don't see a benefit I agree with you on that. I think that if one of the parties is going to come publicly and say, this isn't going well, this isn't fair, we're upset, then okay, then let's bring it out there. So I guess
so the downside of opening up the negotiations themselves so that the public can be present when these issues are being discussed is what exactly?
Well, I think that's my concern. My concern is that if one of the parties is unhappy and wants to bring publicly that they are unhappy, then okay, let's bring it out there and let's talk about it in the open. I do have concerns about, there are things that I do not support in some of what goes on in negotiating in teachers' unions and teachers' contracts and tenure. That being said, I often see teachers vilified. And I think it's very easy to come out and critique or question or use an example of a teacher that you found ineffective and come down really hard on the entire organization. So I am mindful of that in that I think oftentimes it devolves into something that's not productive. At the same time, we are serving children, we are a public institution, and that makes it the public has a vested interest. So I see a benefit to both of them, and I do think that there should definitely be some opportunity for private negotiations to increase the likelihood of honest, open, really trying to get at the meat of hashing things out without all of it being under public scrutiny. But I do see a benefit.
You could sort of use that argument for having closed meetings of the public agency itself. The board, to hash out difficult things because they can be more candid with each other in closed session than an open session. But I think it's time we move on to other questions. So, Elena?
Well, back to the topic of innovation. You said it last week's debate when we were talking about this, that the board hired Superintendent Max McGee because he brought this sort of promise of innovation and a change in the just his general approach to doing things. And you said that the board has supported this in some ways, in other ways got in the way of his innovation. Can you provide specific examples of that? And sure. If elected as a board member, what would you do differently?
Sure. So there are definitely programs, pathways that have come up more since Superintendent McGee has been here, and I am grateful for his work and for the board's work in facilitating those to happen. But as one example, earlier this year, Superintendent McGee suggested that a committee form to look at innovation, to really look at big picture, what can we do? And the board voted, what they said was, there actually was no vote, what the board said was, we would support looking at innovation as long as you take the possibility of a new school off the table. Now, the board might be very clear that they are not interested in opening a new school, but to limit the scope of a committee before they've even started, specifically a committee on innovation, seems insane to me. In my mind, if you are really looking to innovate, and the way Superintendent McGee talked about it was he wanted them to look outside the box and really think what's possible. I see that as an opportunity for our teachers and committee members to go look at what's out there, to go see what's being done, to go see what's tried, to look at research, to look at some of the best practices that are out there, and then bring back what are some possibilities for us. So there's a good chance that that committee could have gone into gone to work and come back and said, a new school doesn't make sense for us. We don't need that. And made 6 other recommendations, or however many, to the board. Another possibility is that they may have come back with a bunch of recommendations, one of which was a new school. And then the board could have looked at it and either said, okay, we're looking at what you said, that's nothing we can afford right now. Or they might have looked and said, oh wow, a school within a school, maybe that could happen in this way, or maybe, who knows? But to limit the scope of looking at innovation before they even started, definitely got in their way. And I am certain that got in their way because when I've talked to community members, I have heard both teachers tell me and community members tell me that teachers have told them that they're not interested in putting much hard work into looking at possibilities because they don't think the board's going to approve them. I've heard that a lot. And in looking at the most recent vote that the board took, they asked the teachers and committee members to spend a year exploring math curriculum, and the committee came back with several curricula that they suggested. And afterwards, and the reason why I think this has to do with innovation is because we now have the Common Core, and we're looking at the types of curricula that are best serving our kids for a 21st century, that are asking them to meet the mathematical practices that are part of the Common Core. And they came with several curricula that they suggested they wanted to pilot, and the board said, oh, one of these isn't third-party approved. And so that wasn't something that initially was requested by the board, and it was something that the teachers and the committee didn't know was something that the board would ask for. And the committee went and explored these curricula, and this one came out as one they really wanted to pilot. And so the board said, we are not going to approve this for a pilot right now because we don't have third-party validation. So I think those are some examples of ways where either the rules of the game get changed beforehand, or because of a desire for a particular outcome, maybe things change along the way. I think that we have systems in place in our district, and one of the values that the district has prioritized is getting community involvement and getting teacher involvement. And if you really want that, it doesn't mean a rubber stamp, but it means you take seriously the work that you've asked the community to do. So if you are going to take that seriously, I think we need to take it more seriously than we've taken it. We've not gone with their recommendations too much. And the board has a right to not ask for community involvement. If they really don't want to prioritize that, they can stop asking people to do this much work for them. But I think it's really important that we look at the systems we have in place and evaluate whether or not they are serving us and serving the community well.
I just want to go back to the EMAC, the post-EMAC recommendation that you're referring to for the committee, the recommendation that a committee look into, among other things, the formation of a new school.
Yep.
In your opinion, it would have been better to have waited for an entire process to be undertaken if the board majority knew at the time that there were neither the financial resources nor the commitment on the part of the board to do that. It would have been better to allow that community activity to take place and then vote it down, because it seems to me that's a little bit in conflict with what you are saying with the other activities, that if the board already knows what its policy limitations are going to be, why put the community through an exercise that has no promise?
So, great question. I think if the question was to go out and just try to design a new school when we know we're not going to start a new school, but I think often when you look at something like innovation, you go out there and look what's out there. You didn't even know some of the possibilities that were out there. So it could be a school within a school. It could be a program.
They were fully supportive of the school within a school concept. They didn't take that off the table. Basically, what they said was, come back to us, which he hasn't done.
Right, he has not.
Come back to us with a plan to explore these innovations that are out there, as you're describing them, within our existing 2 high schools, secondary schools, the 5 secondary schools.
The 5 secondary schools, right.
But we don't want you to spend time pursuing a new high school, because we've determined that given our financial constraints and given our other constraints, that's not a direction we want to go in.
Right. I think it's a good question. I see why you see a conflict there, and I think that when it comes to something like innovation, which is something that I think we really need to do more of, I think that we were not aware. Maybe the first step of the committee was just an assessment of what's out there. Before they start making recommendations, go look, go see what's out there, and then report back to the board, here's what we see. Because I think there are possibilities out there that we're not yet aware of. So I think that decision was made before having all of the information. So I think that there could have been a benefit to whether it was, hey, the new school, call it what you will, right? It's in some ways it's labels, but perhaps the new school is sitting at 25 Churchill and it's part of Pally, but it's its own school, but it, so it's not a huge budgetary increase in the way that I think they were coming from when they said, no, a new school is too much of a budget issue for us. So I think perhaps even a needs assessment is a first step and then a report back to the board.
Yeah, well, and the superintendent didn't help that by becoming a part of this private application for a new school, and basically arguing that there's plenty of private donations out there that could support this work.
That the sequence in which things happened there, I do not think benefited anyone.
Yeah.
Returning to the elementary math committee for a second, there have been some concerns raised that you were both a member and a contributing author to one of the textbooks under investigation. So I just wanted to get your response to that.
Sure. For 25 years, I've been working in math education, and it is elementary math education is somewhat of a small community. I know a lot of the players, a lot of us know each other, and we've either worked with each other, researched together, presented with each other. So investigations is a curriculum that one of several curricula that I used when I was a classroom teacher. So 15 years ago, when I first moved here and was thinking about possible jobs to do in the meantime, I got an offer to work part-time to contribute to a version that they were working on at the time of that curriculum. So I spent a year working part-time, a salary job, contributing some lessons to their second grade math curriculum for investigations. Stopped that work in 2002 and have not worked for them in that capacity since then. The edition that we are currently evaluating is not an edition that I worked on in any way. So I don't find there is a conflict of interest.
So none of the materials that you had contributed in 2002 are currently in that? Okay.
Teacher evaluations, I'd like to ask you about. At our candidates night, you voiced support, as did all the candidates, for the pilot project that's been undertaken. But you, more than I think some of the other candidates, expressed concerns about how that data would be used, and I think it reflects your background as a teacher. I'd like to hear more from you about that, and specifically why it is that you feel that the release of information that reflects student opinions about their classes and the teaching, so that it's publicly available as it is in colleges and in lots of other organizations, the harm of that and why you don't favor that.
I am a fan of using the data to help improve outcomes for kids and classroom time. I think that the data is best used as a sort of professional development for a teacher, right? So and as part of an evaluation of a teacher. So for instructional supervisors, principals, to see that data and to look at it with a teacher and talk about what they notice. I think it comes from me seeing teachers at times get attacked, and yet I don't necessarily think that's a horrible thing for people to know if there's a teacher that is getting consistently low scores, low marks. I'm not sure how it serves us if we trust how it's being used within the system, right? So to put it out there publicly, what does that do for us? If within the system we aren't using that data to help guide us and to help provide professional development or help start due process to remove someone from a job, then yes, we would benefit from the public holding the district more accountable than they are currently being. But if the district is using it in a way that helps remediate, helps support, helps develop, then I don't see a big benefit to releasing it.
Well, I think what the issues, I think, are that parents in the know in the community, they know who to avoid
Right.
and who to get
Right.
in the way of teachers. Those that are not in the know, or that may live in East Palo Alto, or that may be in some way disconnected
Right.
from
It's an equity issue.
It's completely an equity
Right.
issue. And instead of there being rumors about which teachers are the ineffective ones, and boy, whatever you do, don't let Sally get that teacher.
Right.
It's transparent.
Right.
And you hopefully get to a place where there is more clarity as to what the district is doing to either help ineffective teachers become effective and turn them around, or move them out of the district.
Right, so it sounds like what you're saying is there is not satisfaction right now in how that's being done, on how teachers are either being supported or moved out of the district. Because theoretically, if there are these bad reviews, this is something that we're working towards. Two things came to mind when you asked that question. One is there are teachers that my children have had and that I've known as an educator who I haven't thought have been particularly effective, and I've turned around and talked to another parent who have said, oh, it's our favorite teacher. So clearly, right, there's not necessarily consistency on who the good teachers and who the bad teachers are. There is some agreement, I am sure.
I'm not speaking of the middle ground that you just described. I'm talking about the teachers that everybody knows should have been gone a long time ago.
So to me, that would be a big priority to talk about as a board and as a district in next time we're negotiating a teacher contract. What is that due process that has to happen? And that's something that I think would be a tough negotiation, but I think it is the single biggest game changer in the outcomes for our students. Because right now, people agree that there are X number of teachers who are ineffective, who are not, those teachers that everyone tries to avoid. And if the response from the district is, wow, it's really, really hard to get rid of them. Wow, it takes years and years and takes hundreds of hours of work. That's not okay. But
perhaps being the data from student and parent evaluations being public helps that teacher to move along. What teacher wants to remain teaching in a district where year after year, semester after semester, the aggregated results of their students and parents shows that their performance is not good?
What teacher wants
that can help the process along to move that teacher out, right?
I'm not convinced that it would make a difference. It would likely publicly shame. I don't know if it would make a difference and make them move along, because they're already getting that data, even if it's not public. And if we're not changing what our due process is to remove that teacher, if they are not interested in removing themselves, even after all that data is clear to them and their instructional supervisors, then I don't know that would make a big change. I guess it might. But I'm not convinced that's the most effective way to go about it.
As one of the three non-incumbents, I'm curious if you could critique the board's actions over the last 2 years, and tell us if there's one action in particular that you take strongest opposition to, and evaluate it. There
are a lot of big issues. I hand it to the board. I think that it is a hard job. I think that I don't agree with all of them, but I think that they give all of the issues a lot of thought and energy. So I want to say that. I think that, excuse me, over the past few years, there's been a lot of attention to student mental health and well-being, and I appreciate that attention. I think there are some things that the board has done. I think a lot of what the board has done, we are not sure how effective those things have been at improving student mental health. So this is part of why I am interested in really evaluating steps we've taken to look at how they've improved student outcomes or student support. One of the things that I support them doing, even though I know it was controversial, is getting rid of zero period at gun. I know that the way they went about it perhaps was not the most effective way you could go about it. But again, the research is clear. As you hit your teen years, your body clock shifts. You become more of a night owl, you sleep in, and data tell us that, and research tells us that one of the biggest correlators to student well-being and mental health is the amount of sleep they're getting. So if we know from our surveys that we do that students aren't getting enough sleep, and we know that this impacts their mental health, and we know that they are staying up late, then clearly requiring them to wake up early is not something that is going to be good for them. So I appreciate some of those choices that they made, even though they were not necessarily popular choices.
They actually didn't make that choice. They opted not to make that decision. Superintendent McGee unilaterally made that decision.
Interesting. That I was not aware, and I appreciate the clarification.
In fact, the board was
Everyone.
not even aware that there was a zero period. And in
Mr.
fact, that
Dauber
was going to be the
Mr. Dauber was.
that was going to be the follow-up question for me. Is you have spoken strongly for site-based decision-making and deferring to teachers and administrators on many issues. And zero period was implemented unilaterally and sort of under the radar by the gun principal when the bell schedule shifted. The official start moved later in 2011, I think it was. I'm not remembering the exact date. So for 3 years, I believe it was, 3 or 4 years, we operated with zero period without the school board ever discussing it, and apparently even knowing about it. It came out sort of sideways as part of the mental health discussion.
Things too.
So I'm wondering, is that an example of something that a school administrator should have the ability, or the superintendent, to just do if they want to implement something like zero period?
So I think that there should be some leeway for sites to make decisions based on what they think is best for their students. But I think that if they are in conflict with what our goals and values are, then that's something where, bigger picture, we need to step in. So in my mind, given the research as to the importance of sleep and the lack of sleep our students were getting, that's something that doesn't benefit our students, even if it was popular or we saw a scheduling opportunity there or whatnot. That's something that, yes, the board central should have a say in.
But what about when it was originally put in place?
Yeah,
Same thing?
Well, so and this is part of the problem that I see in communicating in the district, communication in the district as a whole. It's one of my concerns and one of what I see as being a community concern. So how does that? Not only did that decision get made, but how did that get communicated? And who did it get communicated to? And how did it get communicated? So does that mean that any single change has to go through some sort of form and go up to the top? And everyone, okay, yes, that's okay. This isn't okay. And then who sees those? I mean, so I think that is a systems discussion to have for sure. I think that is not a decision that should have been made at the site level. But if the principal at the time that made that decision wasn't thinking about something else, that, a major board policy, then they might not have thought, oh, this is something I should raise higher up. So that system in general, I think, is one worth looking at. What are as you make decisions site level, what are things that should be reported up? What are things that should be required for permission to do up? And what are things that can just stay at the site?
So I kind of got you off of Elena's question, I think, which was what actions has the board taken that you most disagree with or would have handled differently? And I don't think we got an answer to that.
No, you did cut me off, but now we're back to that one. Ones that I disagree with. Gosh, I hope you didn't stump me. You didn't stump me. I can come up with something. But I think that I'll try to think of a specific example. One of the things that frustrates me is that I think the squeaky wheels get a lot of attention. So oftentimes conversations are had during board meetings about, oh, the community has concerns about this, the community has concerns about that. And really, when you go out there and look around, you can't find more than like 3 people that have that concern. But there are 3 people that like to make their opinion heard. And I think that when you've got a district of 12,300 students and a community of 66,000, that we have to be really careful about who we're making decisions for, who it's affecting, and because there are a few loud voices that have concerns, you're very rarely going to make a decision that has 100% buy-in. But we need to look at, again, what those priorities are and who our choices are affecting. Let's see if I can come up with one. I'm going to leave it at that on a more general level.
Let me ask you about cases of sexual misconduct, which have arisen particularly at Pali, creating an unsafe and uncomfortable environment both for the staff as well as for students. Phil Winston was not terminated; he was just simply moved to Jordan until they could pay him a severance. And then there was Kevin Sharp, who started a relationship with a student after she graduated, and Ronnie Farrell, who was moved from a temporary position to a permanent position with apparently not so much of a background check. What is your take on how the district handled those cases, and what do you think could have been done differently?
I think that's one of those things we have to have zero tolerance about. Safety of our students is number one. And I think shifting someone around when there is such an accusation is not acceptable. And a severance package and whatnot. I think my understanding is that several of those individuals did not necessarily go through the HR process that our hires typically go through. That they knew somebody, or they were a student teacher, or whatever. And I think that we have to stop doing that, that everyone has to go through the same rigorous process. Even given that, there are times that something's going to come up, and I think we have to act, not only afterwards do we have to act swiftly and strongly, but I think our students benefit when we actually, on the back end, or on the front end, really make sure our teachers understand what the lines to not cross are, and help them understand how something might be interpreted, just ways to be really safe and make the boundaries clear, so that we aren't in these situations where even that is a possibility of happening.
The BPRC has been considering a grooming policy, and what would you say needs to be part of the training of teachers? What is acceptable, what is not acceptable?
I think, it was interesting at the debate. So we talked about, is it okay for a male teacher to hug a female student? And our very heteronormative approach to that, it just tells me that being really aware of that physical contact in any way, that's it. As much as when I was a teacher of elementary school students, I hugged them all the time. But I think we have to think about what, as much as that might be a loss in some ways to not be able to show affection physically to a student, it sets a clearer boundary that makes it easy to make clear when you've passed it and when you've not passed it. It doesn't leave us with a lot of this gray fuzzy that leaves room for these problems to happen.
So that's one line that you would draw? That's
one line that I would draw. I think also social media and online presence has become a huge issue that that is not just, it's not so clear, just do not friend your students on Facebook. When there is a Facebook page that has to do with a particular class and everyone's a part of it, including the teacher, that is a place where they can communicate off to the side. And so I think those are things that deserve a conversation that the district has to come up with a policy for, and then we have to very clearly communicate them. And not everyone's going to be happy about them, whatever they are, I'm sure. But I think first us clarifying, and then us making sure we've communicated clearly and explain the reasons why we've drawn the line where we've drawn it.
Now in the Mike Arrow case, Ohlone, Nikki Smith, the principal, has said that she was interviewed, but she really did not know what the nature of the case was. She was interviewed by the police, which conflicts with the police report. Do you think that she should resign at this point? What responsibility do you hold her to?
So I don't think that she should resign. I do think that we should have a clear policy in place that if the police ever come to ask you about one of your employees, you make sure you pass that up the line. I personally, because my kids are Ohlone, went and asked a bunch of cops that I know and said, hey, if you go question, do you typically, and they all said emphatically, no, I can't walk in and say what it's about, or I'm going to bias what's going to be said. So I am not saying that, I have no idea exactly what the police report says, or if that person made a mistake or whatnot, but the way Ms. Smith describes what happened meshes from what I've gone out and asked about. The people say there's no way that someone would have come in and said what the issue was. They just would have come in and said, what can you tell me?
But what you're saying is that doesn't really matter, right? Because even if the police come and don't tell her a thing, you're saying
there should
she
be a
has an
structure.
obligation to report that to the superintendent.
Well, I don't think there has been a stated fact that is the case, but I think we should have a policy that says.
And the fact that there wasn't a policy, you conclude that there's no, should be no accountability for her failure.
I don't think that was a wise choice. The way that she has said it is, it truly did not seem like a really big deal, and it seems surprising that it does. And I think any time that happens ahead, that will seem like a big deal. I know it will for me, but I do think that it was not a good choice. I don't think that Aloni should lose her because of that.
Mm-hmm. Before we leave this subject, obviously the district has been under scrutiny by OCR now for 3-4 years. Is there anything you'd care to say in terms of your own assessment of the way the district has handled these OCR cases and investigations?
Knowing that I was not a deep part of them when they were happening,
right.
But reading in the press and asking around and whatnot, when there is a federal organization that is charged with trying to protect the civil rights of its citizens, if they come in and tell you that you did something wrong, in my mind, you say thank you, how can you help us fix it? Period.
So you would have, I gather, opposed the resolution that was adopted in June of 2014 that basically set in place a series of criticisms of OCR and
correct.
The lobbying effort to change their,
Yep.
Okay. Right now, the district is just waiting for the other shoe to drop. We know that there will be findings against the district with regards to the sexual harassment allegations at Pali and presumably gun. If you were on the board, I assume you would take your own advice here and just try to be as cooperative as you can be.
Definitely. I hope we can really learn from it. I think there's a lot of things that the district does well. There seems to be some evidence that these are some areas that we could use some help in. And if this is what the OCR does, then I would be happy to listen to their advice and find out what they think how they think we should proceed.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I just had a really quick question about your participation at board meetings. You've been a consistent present at the meeting since before and since announcing your candidacy, but it's less rare that you speak on actual issues or during the public comment sections. Obviously, you're passionate about the issues. You care enough to run for school board. Is there a reason why you don't choose to speak out on particular issues?
I wouldn't say that I make a decision not to speak out. I would say if I think I have something pertinent to add that might better inform the board or bring in an opinion that they haven't heard, I would do it. And I do it occasionally, as you see. But I don't feel the need to speak for speaking's sake. So as it comes up and makes sense, I do.
I want to take advantage of the fact that you're a former teacher to address that issue of teacher voice and how much the district takes into account, the board takes into account what teachers are thinking. The district's moved forward with full-day kindergarten over the objection of kindergarten teachers. Mm-hmm. Also the mandatory use of Schoology, that was highly controversial. Should the district change in any way its procedures for weighing and soliciting teacher opinion on these decisions? I know that the union has, always some opinion about you didn't listen to us. This is not, favorable.
I think it's a great question. I see it as two sort of systems issues. One is we currently have the habit of soliciting opinions in a lot of venues, and then I would say we sort of have a habit of not listening. So I think you can do either one, but I think you should think about how much either change your systems if you don't want to listen to those outside parties, or temper expectations and say, hey, listen, we're going to be considering, there's 10 different things that are going to influence this decision, and one of them is what you guys have to say here. So we want to hear what you have to say, but we're also keeping in mind X, Y, and Z. When it comes to something like Schoology, if there is something that we would like to do because we think it's better for kids, which I think everyone being on the same online system makes a lot of sense, then I think it's fine for us to come in and say, here's what we decided and here's why. But I also think the way you move a system matters. So for 15 years, I've been working with schools and districts and trying to make change. And I have really had some interesting experiences in what gets in the way or what facilitates change. And I think making change there are ways to make change effectively and there are ways to do it ineffectively. And so as a result, whatever way went about trying to get Schoology in place, there are still many parents I've talked to who have said, my kid's teacher's still not on Schoology. So if the goal is to have every kid on the same platform, the way that this happened hasn't yet achieved it. I think we're getting closer. I think it's better. I think we're getting there. But I think that there are ways we could deal with, all right, there is some resistance. What is that resistance about? Why? Let's deal with that and work with that and try to figure out how to do it more effectively, because I think there are probably ways we could do it that would have everybody on Schoology now.
So given that ends up being a matter of union negotiations, does your criticism then reflect some failure on the part of the negotiating process? I mean, why aren't, if Schoology, my understanding from talking to teachers is that the stated objection is that it's not a very good platform, and they've got criticisms of the amount of time and energy it takes to feed the beast with the information that's desired. That has not really surfaced as a problem to be solved.
Right.
It's surfaced behind closed doors. This gets back to our union negotiations.
Yeah.
It surfaced behind closed doors. It surfaced secretly in a union grievance that was brought against the gun principal.
Yep.
That the public would have no way of knowing even took place had it not been for us happening to find out about it.
Yeah.
So how does something like Schoology and your desire to explore, well, where's this resistance coming from? Where does that get dealt with?
Right. So I think that is part of the district's work to do. So it's currently in the contract. It says in the contract that they have to use Schoology, and still it's not being used.
Right.
Right. So even though if the goal is to benefit students in X way, many students are not yet being benefited by that. So we could be, oh yeah, we got it in the contract. It doesn't matter, right? And to some extent. So I don't know if it necessarily is tied to a union contract at times, like it might be, but I think there's a possibility we could have gotten everyone on the same platform without even tying it to the contract.
We tried that, and it didn't work, so we had to put it in the contract
and now
to
we
get
still
them
don't
to
have
do
it.
it, and now that hasn't worked.
So I think it's that how do you move a system? How do you find that common ground, right? So what's important about this to you, teachers, right? Having that conversation, and finding out, so it's clunky. Is there another system that's better?
Right, but where should that take place? Where should that discussion take place? And at what point does it become an imbalance in power? If we've made all these attempts to get compliance, and we still don't have it,
right. So
what's the point of having policies and rules if we don't take any action against those that aren't following it?
Right. So I hope that it starts at a school level. At a site level, you've got a culture, you've got a community, and hopefully that can happen at a site level. It clearly didn't. So in my mind, that then becomes a district-wide level. If it has to go into the union negotiations, that's fine. But I think before it even gets there, okay, this isn't happening. Why isn't this like the why matters? It isn't happening. And if the approach is, I want to better understand why, because this has to happen. It's not an option whether or not we all get on the same platform. We all need to get on the same platform. So if you're really resisting Schoology, what is it? If it's just, I like my system that I use now, or I design my own website, sorry, we all have to be on the same system. That's actually not anything we're going to waste.
But we're past that point.
Right. So
we've been through all that part of the process.
Right. So to me, it's part of the contract. I think it's a district conversation that, okay, this has to happen, and it's not happening. I think what would have benefited us all is way back when, before it just became, hey, this is a rule with the union. What's the resistance? What's going on here? And trying to see if there is a way that we could actually get our end result that we want.
I get that that's, in hindsight, that's the way you would have approached it. What I'm wondering is, what do you do now? You've got a union that is so angry about this topic that it filed its first union grievance against a principal in 15 or 20 years.
Right. So one of the things I would do is, I guess the reason why I'm talking about this, like, in hindsight, is that I think I would really pay attention to the systems we put in place for how we make those changes. Okay, so that hopefully we don't wind up here. I think what I would do here, who deals with that? That's a great question, who deals with that? It is in the contract that it has to happen, and if it doesn't happen, that's something we can take action on, and I think we need to take action on.
Action meaning disciplinary action against the teachers?
Yeah. I mean, it's in the contract. It's something that we have for a reason. It's not just arbitrary. We want to help kids. Yeah.
And so why do you think that hasn't taken place with all the attention that's been focused on this?
They're mad now. They're mad, right? And so that's not an excuse. But what do I think? I think some teachers are pissed off. And if it's really come to this place, disciplinary action. Yes. You know, I mean, I would hope that we could put some systems in place that would stop us from getting here in the future. But now that we are here, it's not okay. I mean,
do you agree that the same thing should happen with the homework policy, which is not part of the contract, but in the same way has been pretty uneven in what teachers pay attention to it or what teachers don't, and how students are being impacted by it?
Yeah, that one's more complex because different assignments take kids different amounts of time to do. So I don't think it's as black and Schoology is somewhat black and white to me. And whether it's Schoology, an online system is black and white to me. The homework policy is harder to implement, but I think that there are ways that we can clarify it. I think that there are clearly some classes that are giving much more homework than other classes. Hopefully that's something that our evaluations can help us with. And even, I mean, I see a need for having some open houses with just open forums with students to talk about what they're experiencing, because you hear from the same voices. So the evaluations are one opportunity to go deeper. That's twice a year. So on a more regular basis, getting that feedback. But when you see consistently across the evaluations that this one class or this one teacher gives much more homework than everyone else, I think we can enforce that. With the quantity you're giving, maybe you think it should fit within this rules, but that quantity is way more than everyone else is giving, and that is disproportionately dominating students' time. I think that we can.
So one of the things that the teachers union has opened up for negotiation this upcoming round of negotiations is to strengthen the due process provisions of the contract to make it more difficult to take action against teachers.
I'm not in support of that.
This is primarily a reaction to what they feel, the union feels, was poor handling of the sexual harassment cases. So you would not support.
Right.
I mean, we're talking about something we don't know what the details of are, obviously. But your inclination is to not make it any more difficult to.
Given the caveat that you just said, my inclination is not to make it more difficult. I think the biggest thing that is getting in the way of really improving outcomes for kids is our complete inflexibility. It is how outrageously difficult it is to control teacher quality, and I think we work really hard at it in professional development, and I think we have to have a growth mindset. We have to come from a growth mindset with teachers. We do with kids. I can tell you my first year of teaching was very difficult. My second year of teaching was pretty difficult too. You're not supposed to be great at it at the very beginning, so I don't think we serve kids, teachers, any of us well to say, like, you're either great or you're horrible. I think we have to look at the strengths teachers bring and the room for improvement and provide that possibility for improvement. But if we don't see it, we need to be able to get rid of that teacher. And yes, there should be a process in place, but it should not be such an arduous process that it takes years to do. Hundreds of kids are passing through their classroom in the meantime.